Chapter 4, The View from Saturday. Mrs. Olinsky sat, waiting until all the members of her class were seated. Then she introduced herself. I am Mrs. Olinsky. I am one of those people who gets to use all those good parking spaces at the mall. She turned toward the blackboard and wrote in big block letters, Mrs. Olinsky, paraplegic. As she wrote paraplegic, Mrs. Olinsky spelled it out. P-A-R-A-P-L-E-G-I-C. It means that I am paralyzed from the waist down. Mrs. Olinsky had thought about what she would say to this, her first sixth grade class in 10 years. She wrote it all down, revised, memorized, and rehearsed until she could deliver her lines with a light touch. Her voice held steady, but her hands did not, and the O of Olinsky was the rough shape of an oil spill. Then a student in the back, Hamilton Knapp, stood up. Excuse me, Mrs. Olinsky, he said, hesitating slightly, mispronouncing her name. I can't see what you've written on the board. Could you write a little higher on the blackboard, please? Mrs. Olinsky replied, not at the moment, and managed an embarrassed smile. The rest of her prepared remarks flew out of her head. She thought she had thought of everything, but here she was with a problem about sight lines to the blackboard. Given time, she would figure it out, but she wished she had not come up on the first hour of if this had not come up on the very first hour of her very first day. After Hamilton Knapp sat down, she laughed nervously. I was about to tell you all that being a paraplegic does not mean that there's anything wrong with my hearing or my eyesight, but I guess we'll have to figure out what to do about the eyesight of those of you who will be seated in the back of the room. Mrs. Olinsky decided that she would write nothing more on the blackboard for the rest of the morning, but would leave what she had already written right there so that she could check it out after lunch. She would return before the rest of the class, wheel herself to the back of the room while it was still empty, and check out the sight lines. She took the roll, checking on the spelling and pronunciation of each child's name, and passed out general supplies and the books for the social studies unit she would be teaching. Finally, she assigned seats in alphabetical order, last name first. The year of her accident, Mrs. Olinsky had had 2 Jennifers in her class. This semester, Jennifer was out of fashion, and J names for boys were in. She had J names from Jared to Julian, including 2 Jasons. When she returned from lunch and saw cripple written on the blackboard, she knew more than names had changed. 6th graders had changed. Ethan finished answering the 4-part question about the history of the state of New York, the first women's right convention organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Auburn was the home of Harriet Tubman, who ran the Underground Railroad. That registers 6 points for the Epiphany team, the commissioner said. There was a spontaneous burst of applause from the side of the aisle that was immediately suppressed by the commissioner. I must admonish the audience not to applaud. It is distracting to both teams. Mrs. Olinsky remembered the day that rude applause had distracted a performance. Her 4th choice had been causing her problems, but it had been on the very day when rude applause interrupted a play that she had made the 4th and final choice for her team. It was the Saturday afternoon after they became the Souls, sometime after they had finished their 4 o'clock tea, when Julian said, We must have a project, and Noah had asked, Isn't peeling wallpaper enough? Julian grinned and said no. He took a small object from his pants pocket and kept it hidden at first in his fist. He rested his hands lightly on the edge of the table. And the calligraphy lessons, aren't they enough? Julian said no again, and Noah asked, Now what? Nadia said, I think Julian already has something in mind. Indeed I do. Julian turned over his fist and opened his hand. There within his palm was a small ivory monkey, only 2 inches high. He laid it on the table and waited until each of the souls had inspected it thoroughly before saying, Gopal gave me this little sculpture. It can do tricks. Julian then stood the little figure first on one foot, then the other, one arm, then the other. You see, this monkey can balance on any one of its 4 limbs. Noah asked, What's that supposed to mean? Ethan replied, I think it has something to do with Mrs. Olinsky. Julian smiled broadly. Indeed it does. Mrs. Olinsky? Noah repeated. Mrs. Olinsky? What? I think that Julian wants us to help her, Ethan explained. Help her do what? Noah asked. Nadia said, stand on her own 2 feet. Have you never heard of that expression, Noah? Of course I have heard that expression, but fact, Mrs. Olinsky cannot stand on her own 2 feet, and further fact, she obviously... Noah's voice trailed off as he understood. I get it, he said. I get it. It is scary trying to stand on your own 2 feet, especially when you don't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. Julian rubbed the little ivory monkey. There are some in the school who try to get her off balance. Some are in our homeroom. We can give her some support, Ethan said. Better than that, Nadia said. We can give her a lift. They all turned to Noah. "What do you suggest?" they asked, knowing Noah would have an answer. And he did. The commissioner reached into the bowl again. He allowed his hand to touch bottom before spreading his fingers to pick up the next question. An acronym is defined as a word formed the initial letters of a series of words. For example, radar is an acronym for radio, detecting, and ranging. RA from radio, D from detecting, A from, and R from ranging. Can you give me 2 more examples of acronyms that have entered our language as words? Julian's buzzer went off. "Posh and tip," he called out. This begins on page 99. Julian narrates when Ginger played Annie's Sandy. It was the Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend that Ethan Potter suggested to Nadia Diamondstein that she have Ginger play Annie's Sandy. I had no idea what he was talking about. I knew, of course, that Ginger referred to Nadia's beloved and talented dog, so I thought perhaps Andy's Sandy was a video game played by the Canine Orders. However, the word play referred to playing a part in a musical show about an orphan named Annie, in a show called Annie, and Sandy was the name of the dog belonging to the title character. Epiphany High School was putting on the play for the holiday season. Until we moved to Epiphany, I had no idea how busy Americans are between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, the time they refer to as the holiday season. Everyone asks, "Are you ready for the holidays?" And then afterward, they ask, "How were your holidays?" During the holidays themselves, no one asks about them. When Ethan suggested that Nadia have Ginger try out, Nadia said, "Ginger does not do ARF." Another remark I did not understand. I did not intend to ask. I knew that if I waited, an explanation would come. It did. The play Annie is based on an American comic strip called Little Orphan Annie, and when Annie's Sandy speaks in the balloon over his head is written ARF. Everyone had already been cast for the high school production, but not the dog Sandy, and Mrs. Reynolds, the play director, had put a notice on the bulletin board that anyone with a well-trained dog could try out. Ethan said, "They call that a cattle call." Noah said, "Why would they call it a cattle call if they are asking for dogs?" Ethan said, "It's a theatrical saying. It means an open audition. Even if they mean people, they call it a cattle call." "Then why do they call it a cattle call?" Noah asked. Ethan replied, "A roundup, I guess." He turned to Nadia and said, "Ginger's bark will do very well. Besides, she looks a lot like Sandy, except that her eyeballs aren't blank." In time, I came to understand that remark too. The artist who drew the comic strip never drew irises on the eyes of people or dogs. Noah said, "There is one other thing." Nadia ignored Noah. She said to Ethan, "If I do have Ginger try out, she will get the part. Ginger is a genius." Noah said, "There is one other thing." Nadia turned to Noah and said, "Ginger is a genius. She will get the part." "Nadia, my dear," Noah insisted, "Sandy is a male. In fact, Ginger is a female. From everything I've learned in health education, genes, not genius, determine, if you'll excuse the expression, gender. Unless Ginger wants a plastic surgeon, she won't fit the part." Nadia said, "Noah, is there any subject in this whole world that you don't know more about than every other being on the planet?" Noah shrugged. "Not every other being on the planet. Let's just say every other being in this room." "Do you have a dog?" she asked. "No, but..." "Just answer the question. Do you have a dog?" "No, but..." "Just answer the question. Have you ever had a dog?" "No, but..." "Just answer the question. Have you ever had a dog?" "No." Nadia said, "I rest my case." Noah would not give up. "Have you ever had allergies that kept you from having a dog?" he asked. "No." "Have you ever had a brother who had allergies that kept you from having a dog?" "No, I have not, and neither have you." "Have you ever had a brother?" "No." Ethan interrupted. "Getting back to Ginger, you ought to let her try out." Nadia said, "I shall. She will get the part, and they will consider themselves lucky, which they should, because Ginger is a genius." The bickering between Nadia and Noah no longer made me uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, I had begun to enjoy it, and so had we all, including Noah and Nadia. Once Nadia made her decision to have Ginger try out for the part, I told them that in the days when I had traveled with my parents on the cruise line, I saw a number of animal acts. There were not many, for keeping animals on board the ship is not easy. I explained that wild animals were out of the question, as were the larger varieties of domestic animals such as cow or horse. There was a monkey once, but it was a terrible thief. The monkey, whose name was Sapphire, his hindquarters were bright blue, would swing down from a flagpole or a railing and steal shiny objects like pins or barrettes, or even worse, jewelry. Sapphire always would drink anything that was left unattended, in a cup or a glass. As a result, Sapphire was often drunk and incapable of bladder control. Most passengers were not amused, and the captain had Sapphire and his owner put off the ship at the next port. Most of the animal acts on board the ship involved dogs, I explained. From watching them, I learned what trainers do. So it was that even before the cattle call, the souls began the intensive training of Ginger. I taught each of the souls how to palm a treat so that no one in the audience would notice. First, we taught Ginger to respond to Nadia, and then Nadia fused with Ethan, and Ethan with Noah, and then Noah with me, until at last Ginger would respond to the treat and not the person. We trained Ginger to accept the treat without excessive salivating. Most people who are not dog owners, and even many who are, do not care very much for a tongue bath. Ethan got a copy of the script. In the play, the policeman asks, "Is that your dog, little girl?" And Sandy is supposed to bark. We taught Ginger to bark on cue, and the more she did it, the more it sounded like "arf." Ginger had learned her lines. Ginger had learned her cues. Ginger was a genius. 8 dogs, their owners, the entire cast of the play, and the souls attended the dog tryouts. I had thought about bringing Alice, but Papa advised against it. He said that a daughter should not be in competition with her mother, but I think he would have missed her during the time she would be at rehearsals. Alice and Papa kept each other company when I was at school. Alice had become our early warning system. Every time someone started up the path to Sillington House, Alice barked to let us know. We were a little concerned that when we had paying guests, which would be soon, this might be a problem. One of the 8 dogs was quickly eliminated on the grounds of disobedience. The second had a problem with his plumbing, and Mrs. Reynolds was not amused by the snickers in the audience or the mess on stage. The next 2 were small, nervous creatures that looked like battery-operated plush toys. They did not run in a straight line, but zigzagged and yipped their way across the stage. Numbers 5 and 6 were male and did embarrassing things to legs, any legs, male or female, that happened to be on stage. The 2 remaining contenders were Ginger and Michael Frolick's dog, Arnold. Arnold, a well-behaved yellow Labrador retriever, was larger than Ginger and was, quite decidedly and obviously, male. I wanted Ginger to get the part not only because she belonged to Nadia and not only because she was Alice's mother, but also because I did not want Michael Frolick to have the honor. Since those first few weeks at school, I had done my best to avoid both Michael Frolick and his friend Hamilton Knapp. Arnold tried out before Ginger. The girl who was to play Annie stood center stage, clapped her hands upon her thighs, and Arnold leaped across the stage, placed his paws upon Annie's shoulders, and caused her to lean backward. She almost fell. Frolic ran across the stage and quickly hooked a leash to Arnold's collar and said to Stage Annie, "I promise you that won't happen again, but it will help if you dig your heels in a little." Mrs. Reynolds, the drama teacher, said, "Next." It was Ginger's turn, and Stage Annie once again clapped her hands on her knees. Nadia quietly whispered, "Go, Ginger," gave her a little push on her rump, and quickly crossed to the other side of the stage behind the backdrop and stood in the wings on the opposite side of the stage where no one in the audience could see her. But Ginger could. In between stood Stage Annie holding a treat. Privately, before tryouts began, I had slipped backstage and taught Stage Annie how to palm a treat and pass it off so that no one in the audience could see. Ginger walked across the stage with enthusiasm and dignity and quietly nuzzled Stage Annie's hand before sitting at her feet. Ginger was in every way clearly superior to every other dog there, even her mixed breeds looking better suited the part than Arnold's purebred sleekness. Ginger was first-rate. Ginger had star quality. Ginger got the part. Mrs. Reynolds, the drama coach, who was the director of the play, said, "Ginger will be Annie's Sandy, and Arnold will be Ginger's understudy." We souls sitting in the audience applauded, and Ethan stood and yelled, "Bravo, Mrs. Reynolds, bravo!" Ethan had always wanted to stand up in a theater and yell bravo. Mrs. Reynolds said, "Who is doing that yelling?" Ethan waved his hand and called out, "It's me, Mrs. Reynolds. Me, here, Ethan Potter." Mrs. Reynolds shielded her eyes from the footlights to see out over the audience. "Ethan Potter?" Still screening her eyes, she smiled. "Ethan Potter, I didn't recognize you." I believe that she did not recognize him, for the person yelling bravo was Ethan the Soul, not Ethan the Silent. Then she asked, "How's your grandmother, Ethan?" "She's fine, Mrs. Reynolds. She got married last summer." "I heard," Mrs. Reynolds replied. "And how's that big brother of yours? How's Lucas?" "He's fine, Mrs. Reynolds." "Will you tell him I said hello?" "Yes, I will." "When will you see him again?" "He'll be home for Christmas." "I hope he'll come see the play," she said. "Will you tell him?" "Yes, I will." Ethan did not say another word until we left the auditorium that day. Ginger learned to bark "arf" on cue and quickly won the hearts of the entire cast, as well as Mrs. Reynolds. Nadia was beaming. Nadia had kindly passed along training information to Frolic and on to Stage Annie, and Arnold's performance improved to within a shade of Ginger's. It would have been better if Arnold had been eliminated altogether. Second best can be worse than not in the running. Who knew what was happening inside Frolic's head as he trained Arnold? Who knew what was happening inside Frolic's head when he attended rehearsals? He had to attend them all and had to do nothing except wait backstage and watch admiration and affection be heaped on Ginger. That amounted to a lot of work for little Glory. During the actual performances, he and Arnold were to stay backstage and out of sight unless something happened to Ginger. Did having Arnold as understudy make Frolic feel like an underdog? I was not without worry. The main performance was to be on Saturday evening, before the winter recess. That was when friends and family would attend. This event was exciting for Papa and not only me, because Alice's mother was about to make her dramatic debut, but also because Sillington House was too. Mr. and Mrs. Diamondstein were flying up from Florida to celebrate Christmas with the Potters and would be our first paying guests. They planned on to arrive in time to see Ginger play Annie's Sandy. Papa had only one of the guest bedrooms ready, but he was quite proud of it, and so was I. He hung the bed linen on a clothesline he strung across the backyard so that everything would smell of the sweet air that blew off the lake. He purchased a beautiful cut glass carafe and matching drinking glass and put them on the nightstand by the bed. He purchased a poinsettia and put it on the dresser. In the closet were the heavy hangers of polished wood, not those permanently attached things that you find in cheap motels, nor the weak wire ones you get from the dry cleaners. That Papa had brought in England. We had them all facing the same way, so that their shadows on the wall looked like a computer rendering of an architectural cross-section. The sink and tub were scrubbed until their whiteness was snow-blind. The faucets shone enough to use as mirrors. We're going to stop there for today, guys. We're at the top of page 107.